What is up, guys? So the second to last episode of Arrow ever, which is season 8 episode 9, titled Green Arrow and the Canaries, was recently released, and along with being the second to last episode ever, it's also a backdoor pilot for a potential spin-off show. This is, I think, like the 4th time, or maybe the 5th time Arrow has had a backdoor pilot, certainly more than any other TV show I've ever seen, but also more than, obviously, anything in the Arrowverse, including there's in season 2 a couple episodes for The Flash, in season 3 a couple episodes for Legends of Tomorrow through the Atom, and in season 4 a couple episodes for Legends of Tomorrow with White Canary, as well as the crossover event of that season. And while there hasn't been a backdoor pilot in a while, this is another one for a potential TV show. So in this video, I'll be reviewing this episode, but I feel like, obviously I don't know what will be more or less, but I feel like I'll more talk about whether or not I think the TV show should be picked up, and if it isn't picked up, then how they maybe could resolve the story that's started in this episode, because this episode asks a lot of questions and doesn't really give us many answers, which I think maybe might be more enticing to either viewers or maybe even the network to pick up the actual show so they can answer those questions. But I will talk about all those things in this video, starting with the review. So honestly, I think I liked this episode a lot more than I expected, because there were a lot of reasons to not expect to like this episode. The fact that it doesn't have Stephen Amell, that's definitely a big one, as in this show, not having Oliver Queen, not even focusing on Oliver Queen, having him a side character is a recipe for disaster. I mean, just look at season 4 where he basically wasn't the main character of that season, and it's absolutely god-awful. On top of that, the future was so uninteresting in season 7 and even in the beginning of season 8, and I really didn't think that deserved a spin-off show or even its own entire episode. I mean, the last time they did an entire episode set in 2040 was Star City 2040, and that was easily, by far, the worst episode of season 7. And all of those reasons, plus the fact that Mia, up until maybe recently, was not the most interesting or likable character, all of those things were basically a recipe for disaster, and honestly, I did like this episode a lot more than, obviously, I expected to. I think the new Star City 2040 is more interesting of sorts. Instead of being a dystopia, which is really what we saw in season 7, it's more of a utopia where they say there's been no crime for 20 years, but now that utopia is being disrupted, they have to do something about it. That's actually an interesting concept we haven't really seen much of. And honestly, I don't think I've ever seen that before in any movie or TV show where there's a utopia, but that utopia is vulnerable to falling apart and the heroes have to stop that from happening. That's really interesting. However, even though that's really unique and interesting, I don't know how long that could last, as they said that the dystopia the utopia will fall apart in the year 2041, so unless they make it so that time passes way slower as opposed to the real world, then this could only last for maybe a season and a half, because by the time that comes around, it'll be 2042, so I don't really know if this could this really hold up an entire series, but I do think for now, it is an interesting concept for this very episode with the potential TV show, and that's that it's just basically Arrow without Oliver, but also I think the characters and the concept is not enough to hold up an entire TV show. It's something that maybe will work for one season where these 3 characters team up with each other and stop this dystopia from ever happening. That could be interesting, but I don't think that would last for more than one season. The concept will be annoying after one season, and I also think that the characters have nowhere to go, like in terms of development. Laurel is at her peak. She peaked in season 8. The only way you could really make her better is if she and Oliver had a romantic relationship, but that's obviously impossible and has been impossible for a very long time, really ever since season 3. They were dead set on making Oliver and Felicity together, so that was never possible. But other than that, Laurel was at her peak in season 8, and going forward, there's literally nothing you could do with the character, which is good, but also when you start a TV show, that's terrible, because there's going to be this static character going into a TV show where that might last for a couple years. For Dinah, she's also had years of development through season 5, 6, 7, and 8. Not really much in season 8 specifically, but season 5, 6, and 7, she definitely had a lot of storylines, definitely had a lot of development, some of which was already retconned, like her Canary Cry being slashed away. But I do think that, like Laurel, while she hasn't peaked necessarily, there isn't really much to do with the character, as she's already had years of development going into the TV show, and this is when the TV show is starting. So what do you really do with her development-wise? I think Mia is probably probably the only character you can develop. However, she's already had a lot of development and growth over the course of Arrow Season 8 specifically, so that, like, the main thing you could possibly do with that character has already been done. So development-wise, characters-wise, I think this TV show wouldn't really work, since all of these characters, at least some of them, and one of them in particular, has already had years and years of development, and one of them has already peaked. To go into a TV show where there's nothing to do with these characters development-wise, it really will not work. There's also the problem of this show connecting to the Arrowverse. I mean, it's set in 20 years after the rest of the Arrowverse, so how can it really connect to that? How can they make it so that every single time a crossover comes around, this show connects to the Arrowverse? There's really no way, unless the Legends and the Flash time travels these characters back to the present day every single time a crossover rolls around, which in my opinion sounds a little bit ridiculous, sounds something that wouldn't make any sense. So unless the show goes back to the 2020s at some point, there's no way that could work going forward. So those, I think, are two big reasons for why Green Arrow and the Canaries can't really work past maybe one season. And honestly, I would like to see that one season again. I am interested, but the fact that it can only last for one season makes me think that maybe it shouldn't exist. And honestly, there is a pretty big possibility that Green Arrow and the Canaries, which from now on I'll just call Green Arrow, will not be picked up for series. Because, I mean, if you contrast it with Superman and Lois, which from now on I'll just call Superman, I mean, these titles are unnecessary, the and part. But if you contrast it with Superman, that's a show that was confirmed to be in development 10 days after Green Arrow. However, it was picked up for a full series a couple weeks ago, while Green Arrow has, according to Mark Guggenheim, not been picked up at this point. And I think Superman and Lois has a couple of more things going for it, like it's a show about Superman, probably the most famous fictional character of all time, and definitely up there along with Lois, definitely the most famous love interest of all time, and also one of the most famous fictional characters of all time as well. While Green Arrow is a show about the daughter of even at this point still like a B-list superhero. So I think that Superman has that going for it. It's also a spin-off show for a show that has higher ratings, as Supergirl does at this point still have higher ratings than Arrow, which, I mean, it's only really because Arrow is 3 seasons ahead of Supergirl, as I'm pretty sure Arrow Season 5 versus Supergirl Season 5, Arrow did have higher ratings, but at this point, Supergirl's ratings are higher. So yeah, Superman was a much better bet than Green Arrow, so they confirmed it quicker. But I think that might be maybe balanced out by the fact that Green Arrow already has a staff, it already has a whole cast already confirmed, while Superman only had 2 actors, Tyler Hoechlin and Elizabeth Tulloch. Green Arrow and the Canaries already had everything, so I feel like that either balances it out, or it really emphasizes how much more CW is sure about Superman as opposed to Green Arrow and the Canaries. So I do think that Green Arrow has a possibility of not being picked up. So I right now will go over how I think they should resolve the story because of all the questions they asked without the show, because I think there are a couple options. I think the very best option for this is that instead of Green Arrow and the Canary Season 1, they resolve the whole storyline with Legends of Tomorrow Season 6 for a couple reasons. For one, I think that there is a connection here. It takes place in the future. Legends of Tomorrow has a couple episodes taking place in the future, but also it's a time travel show, so that connection is not that hard in like a week-to-week basis. But also, apparently Laurel was sent to 2040 to stop the whole thing with 2041 by Sarah, or she got there because of Sarah, and maybe Sarah and the Legends brought Dinah there as well. So there is that Legends of Tomorrow connection already, but also because Legends of Tomorrow is not really doing anything, and it hasn't been doing anything since like Season 2. Honestly, I don't think a single season of Legends of Tomorrow has mattered since Season 2. I like Season 3, but honestly, it's pretty much filler, and so is Season 4, and it looks like Season 5 will be as well. So I think they could do something with Legends of Tomorrow. It desperately needs more characters. It desperately needs a storyline. So maybe in Season 6, they could give them this storyline, which, by the way, is a season that's already confirmed. But on top of that, I think by far the best thing about the first episode of Season 5, the only episode that's aired so far, is Sarah and her reaction to the crisis, her dealing with that, and dealing with Oliver's death, which could be something that they expand upon in Season 5, but also in Season 6, with the introduction to Sarah of the legacy of Oliver Queen through Mia, and Green Arrow and the Canary. So maybe that's something they could do, resolve this whole storyline, have this entire storyline on Legends of Tomorrow, which I think is a distinct possibility if the show is never picked up. Certain other options include maybe a miniseries where it's only one season, which is something that I wouldn't mind seeing. However, I don't think the CW would ever do that. A comic book tie-in, which could be cool. A CWCH show, which has the potential to be cool, but probably wouldn't be. And maybe they just do it off screen, like maybe on Legends or The Flash, they go to the future and they mention that Star City is still fine in like 2043 or something. So they confirm that the Green Arrow and the Canaries succeeded, or something along those lines. However, my final thoughts for all this is I don't necessarily think Green Arrow and the Canaries should be picked up unless it's just for one season and that's a miniseries. And if it isn't, which isn't really possible, then I do think the storyline should be resolved, because there's a lot of questions that are never going to be answered if the show doesn't get picked up. And I think it's best to resolve them in Legends of Tomorrow, because Legends of Tomorrow desperately needs it. In terms of my review for the episode, which I noticed I didn't really go over very much, because honestly I don't really care about it all that much. I thought it was an okay episode. I enjoyed it for the most part. However, again, I don't think it worked really as a backdoor pilot, and it was by far the worst episode of this season. Considering there's only 10 episodes in the season, I feel like it will cripple the average score of the season, since the first 8 episodes were all 9 out of 10s in my opinion, or at least like most of them were above 9 out of 10. Well, this one would probably be like a 7.5 or something. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.